I never imagined that one phone call would change my life forever, but when I heard that trembling voice on the other end of the line begging me to come back, I knew my world was about to collapse all over again. My name is Keisha Washington, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes fate places us exactly where we need to be, even when everything seems lost. I was sitting in my tiny kitchenette, staring through the foggy window of my one-bedroom apartment in the Detroit suburbs, when my old phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the heavy silence of that March afternoon, and for a moment I hesitated to answer. Over the past 2 years, phone calls rarely brought good news my way. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the device, and the voice I heard on the other side made me sit down hard in the plastic chair that creaked under my weight. "Keisha? Keisha Washington?" The voice was unmistakable, even after all this time. It was Helena Blackwood, my former employer, the woman who had dismissed me so cruelly 2 years ago. My heart started beating so hard I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. Why would she be calling me now? "Mrs. Blackwood?" My voice came out weaker than I would have liked, loaded with a mixture of surprise and an old pain I thought I had buried. I could taste the bitter memory of that terrible day rising in my throat. What happened next left me completely stunned. Helena Blackwood, the elegant and always composed woman I had known, began to cry on the other end of the line. It wasn't a delicate or restrained cry, but deep, desperate sobs that made me press the phone against my ear, as if that could help me better understand what was happening. "Keisha, I need to ask for your forgiveness. Please, forgive me." The words came out broken between sobs, and I felt my own throat tighten. For 2 years I had dreamed of hearing those words, but now that they came, I didn't know how to react. "Mrs. Blackwood, I don't understand," I began to say, but she interrupted me. "You were right all along. After you left, other things started disappearing. We discovered it was Margaret, our cook. She confessed everything, Keisha. Everything. And I accused you wrongfully. We tried to find you, but you had moved, changed your phone number." Her voice broke again, and I closed my eyes, feeling hot tears beginning to roll down my face. 2 tears fell on my free hand, and I watched them slide between my fingers. For 2 years I had carried the mark of that false accusation like an invisible scar. Nobody wanted to hire a nanny who had been fired for theft, even without proof. My reputation had been destroyed in a single day, and since then I had survived on sporadic cleaning jobs and some night shifts at a supermarket. "But why are you calling me now?" I asked, wiping the tears with the back of my hand. I could hear the traffic noise through the window, the world continuing its normal course, while my universe was being reorganized with that phone call. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with a tension I could feel through the phone line. When Helena finally spoke, her voice was even lower, almost a whisper. "It's Marcus, Keisha. My son. He's very sick." I felt my stomach drop. Marcus. The boy with curly brown hair and honey-colored eyes that I had cared for almost 5 years. The boy who called me Key, because he couldn't pronounce my full name when he was little. The boy who would cling to my legs every morning when I arrived for work, and who cried when I left at the end of the day. The same boy who had been my light during the most difficult years of my life, right after I stopped that thought before it could form completely. Some memories were too dangerous to be revisited without preparation. "What does he have?" I asked, and my voice came out hoarse. I could feel my heart breaking just imagining that sweet child suffering. "Leukemia." The word fell like a heavy stone in the silence between us. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The doctors, they say it's aggressive." "Very aggressive." I brought my free hand to my chest, where I felt a physical pain spreading. Marcus, my Marcus, was facing something so terrible. I remembered how he used to run around the house, his curls bouncing as he chased our cat Whiskers, how he laughed when I made funny voices reading his favorite books before bed, how he would hug me when he stumbled and got hurt, seeking comfort in my arms. "How is he?" I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. "He's not well, Keisha. Physically and emotionally. He's not well. After you left, he never accepted another nanny. We tried several, but he just withdrew. And now, with the treatment," Helena paused, and I could hear her breathing deeply, trying to control herself. "He's lost a lot of weight. His hair fell out because of chemotherapy, and he keeps asking for you, always, especially now, when he's feeling weaker." The tears returned with full force. I could see Marcus clearly in my mind, not as a sick child, but as the vibrant boy I knew, that I loved. Because yes, I loved that child as if he were mine, maybe even more than I should have. He wants to see you, Keisha. Actually, he begs to see you. And we would like to know if you would consider coming back. Not permanently, just— Helena hesitated, and I could imagine her struggling to find the right words. Just to be with him during this period. We know we have no right to ask this after what we did to you, but I'll go. The words came out of my mouth before my brain could fully process the situation. There wasn't even a second of hesitation. Marcus needed me, and that was all that mattered. Will you really? The surprise in Helena's voice was palpable. When can I see him? I asked, already getting up from the chair and looking around my small apartment, mentally making a list of what I would need to organize to be away. Today, if you want. He's at Detroit Children's Hospital, room 314. Keisha, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. This is for Marcus. My voice was firm now, filled with a determination I hadn't felt in a long time. I'll be there in an hour. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of my small living room, trying to process everything that had just happened. In a single conversation, my past had come back to get me in a way I could never have imagined. Marcus was sick, and they wanted me to come back. But there was something else, something I hadn't told Helena during our phone conversation, something I kept as a painful secret for more than 8 years, a secret that made all of this infinitely more complicated and heartbreaking than she could imagine. I went to my closet and took out my only clean dress shirt, a navy blue piece I saved for special occasions. My hands were trembling slightly as I changed, and it was only when I was looking at myself in the small, cracked mirror in my bathroom that I allowed reality to hit me completely. I was going to see Marcus again, the boy who had been my anchor during the darkest years of my life, the boy who, unknowingly, had filled a void in my heart that I thought could never be filled. The boy who reminded me every day of another child, a child I had been forced to give up many years ago. I grabbed my purse, a brown synthetic piece that had seen better days, and left the apartment. The hallway of the building smelled of mold and reheated food, an aroma that had become familiar, but never comfortable. I went down the stairs, since the elevator had been broken for 3 months, and stepped out into the gray Detroit afternoon. The cold March air cut my face as soon as I stepped on the sidewalk. I pulled my coat tighter around my body and started walking toward the bus stop. During the entire walk, my mind was full of memories of Marcus. I remembered how he used to wait for me at the front window every morning, his little face pressed against the glass, looking for me on the street. How he would run to the door as soon as he saw me coming, shouting, "Key! Key!" with that high-pitched voice full of joy. The bus took 15 minutes to arrive, and during that time I stood there at the stop, watching the city's movement around me. Cars passed honking. People walked hurriedly with their important lives, and I felt like I was in a bubble, separated from all of this by something I couldn't name. When I finally got on the bus, I chose a window seat and rested my forehead against the cold glass. The city scenes passed blurred as we traveled toward the hospital, but I barely paid attention. My mind was completely focused on what awaited me. How would Marcus be? Helena had said he had lost weight and that his hair had fallen out. Would he still smile that way he used to smile, with his eyes squinting until they became 2 small crescents? Or had the disease taken that too? And most importantly, would he remember me? 2 years had passed. For a child, that was a long time. Maybe he had forgotten our special connection. Maybe he didn't want to see me anymore. But then I remembered Helena's voice on the phone, saying he constantly asked about me. My heart warmed with that possibility. Marcus remembered me. After all this time, all the pain and separation, he still wanted to see me. Detroit Children's Hospital appeared in the window after 20 minutes of travel. It was a large, modern building with glass walls that reflected the cloudy sky. I got off the bus and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just watching the coming and going. People were constantly entering and leaving. Doctors in white coats, nurses in colorful uniforms, families carrying flowers and gifts. Other families leaving with faces marked by worry or tragedy. I took a deep breath and started walking toward the main entrance. My shoes made a dry sound against the concrete, and I could feel my heart beating faster with each step. The automatic doors opened with a soft whisper, and I was greeted by the aseptic and familiar environment of hospitals, that characteristic smell of disinfectant mixed with something I could never completely identify. The receptionist, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a low bun, gave me a gentle smile when I approached the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice was soft and welcoming. "I'm looking for room 314. Marcus Blackwood," I said, and felt my voice tremble slightly as I pronounced his full name. "Third floor, pediatric wing. The elevators are right over there." She pointed to a hallway to my left. "Are you related to the child?" I hesitated for a moment. How should I introduce myself? Ex-nanny seemed insufficient to describe what Marcus meant to me. "I'm a very close friend of the family," I finally answered, and technically that wasn't a lie. The elevator took forever to arrive, or at least that's how it seemed to me. When the doors finally opened, I got in and pressed the button for the third floor. During the ride up, I watched my reflection in the polished metal doors. My face looked thinner than I remembered, and there were dark circles under my eyes that told the story of the last 2 difficult years. I smoothed my hair, which was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and tried to mentally prepare for what was to come. The doors opened to reveal a long, well-lit corridor, with walls painted in soft pastel tones that had obviously been chosen to be calming. There were children's drawings stuck on the walls, smiling suns, rainbows, happy-faced animals. It was the type of decoration that tried to make a sad place seem cheerful, but somehow achieved the opposite effect. I followed the directional signs until I found room 314. The door was half closed, and for a moment I stood there, trying to gather courage. I could hear low voices coming from inside. Helena's voice, which I would recognize anywhere, and a male voice that must be her husband, Robert. I knocked gently on the door and waited. "Come in," I heard Helena say, and her voice carried a mixture of anxiety and hope. I pushed the door gently and entered the room. The first thing I noticed was how the space was different from a common hospital room. There was a comfortable sofa in the corner, several plants, pictures on the walls, and toys scattered throughout. It was obvious that the Blackwoods had done everything they could to make the environment more welcoming for Marcus. Helena was sitting beside the bed, and Robert was standing near the window. Both turned when I entered, and I saw immediate relief on their faces. Helena got up quickly and came toward me, as if she wanted to hug me, but stopped halfway, perhaps realizing there was still a distance between us that needed to be carefully navigated. "Keisha, thank you for coming. Thank you so much," she said, and her voice was full of genuine gratitude that made me feel some of the ice around my heart begin to melt. But my attention was completely focused on the small bed in the center of the room, and that's when I saw him. Marcus was lying against several pillows, and my heart broke the moment my eyes landed on him. Helena was right. He had lost a lot of weight. His face, which used to be chubby and rosy, was now thinner and paler. But what shocked me most was seeing his head completely bald. The golden curls I used to run my fingers through had completely disappeared, leaving only smooth, pale skin. He was sleeping, and for a moment I just stood there watching the gentle movement of his chest rising and falling. Even sick, even changed, he was still unmistakably my Marcus. The expressive eyebrows, the cheeks that held dimples when he smiled, the small hands that used to cling to my shirt when he was afraid. "He's been sleeping a lot because of the medications," Helena whispered beside me, "but I can wake him up if you want. He'll be very happy to see you." Before I could answer, Marcus stirred in the bed. His eyes opened slowly, still heavy with sleep, and he blinked a few times as if trying to focus. When his gaze finally met mine, I saw the exact moment when he recognized me. His eyes widened completely, and an expression of pure joy and disbelief spread across his face. It was like the sun had risen in that dark room. "Key?" His voice came out as a hoarse whisper, but loaded with so much love and hope that I felt my knees go weak. "Key, you came back?" And it was at that moment that I knew that no matter what had happened before, no matter how much time had passed, no matter how many obstacles might still arise, I was exactly where I should be, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would make me leave there again. But what I didn't know yet was that my presence in that room, at that moment, was about to trigger a series of discoveries that would change our lives forever. And the first of those discoveries was much closer than I could imagine. "Key!" Marcus shouted with all the strength he could muster, and within seconds he was trying to sit up in bed, his thin arms reaching out toward me. Without thinking twice, I ran to him and wrapped him in a careful hug, feeling how fragile his little body was now, as if he could break in my arms. His smell had changed. Before, Marcus always smelled like baby soap and the cookies he loved to steal from the kitchen. Now there was a medicinal aroma that constantly reminded me of where we were and why we were there. But when he pressed his face against my neck and whispered, "I knew you'd come back," everything else stopped mattering. "I missed you, my love. I missed you so, so much," I said against his non-existent hair. And it was only when I spoke those words that I realized how true they were. For 2 years, a part of me had been incomplete, a child-shaped void that I tried to ignore every day. Marcus pulled back slightly to look at me, his honey-colored eyes shining with unshed tears. "Are you really here? This isn't a dream?" "I'm here, baby. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere," I replied, running my hand gently over his cheek. His skin was warmer than it should be, and I wondered if it was fever or just a side effect of the medications. Helena approached the bed, and for the first time since I entered the room, I really looked at her. In the 2 years that had passed, she had also changed. Her blonde hair had gray streaks I didn't remember seeing before, and there were deep lines around her blue eyes that told the story of constant stress and worry. "Marcus, Keisha came to pay you a special visit," Helena said, her voice loaded with an emotion she was clearly trying to control. "Can she stay forever?" Marcus asked, looking between the two of us with hope so pure it made my heart tighten. "Please, Mommy, I promise I'll take all my medicines and won't complain about the tests if she can stay." Helena and I exchanged a look over Marcus's head. There was so much we needed to talk about, so many things that were still hanging in the air between us. But for now, none of that mattered. "Let's talk about that, okay?" Helena said diplomatically. "For now, how about you two catch up?" The next few hours passed like a sweet and painful blur. Marcus told me about his illness with a maturity that broke my heart. He knew exactly what he had, knew about chemotherapy, knew he was very sick, as he put it. But the way he talked about it all, with such calm acceptance, made me realize how much he had grown in those 2 years. "My hair will grow back when I get better," he explained to me, running his hand over his bald head. "Dr. Sarah said it might grow differently, straighter or darker. Will you still like me, even if it's different?" Marcus Blackwood, I will love you no matter what you look like, with hair, without hair, tall, short, it doesn't matter. Do you understand? I said, holding his little face between my hands. "Nothing in this world can change how I feel about you." He smiled, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the boy I knew. It was a smile that lit up his entire face, making his eyes squint in that way I loved so much. Robert had left for work but returned in the late afternoon. When he entered the room and saw me there, his expression was one of genuine relief. Robert had always been a gentle and fair man, and I could see in his eyes that he carried the weight of guilt for what had happened to me. "Keisha, thank you for coming," he said simply, but there was so much meaning in those simple words. As night fell, Helena pulled me to a corner of the room, while Marcus watched cartoons on the small TV mounted on the wall. "Keisha, I know we have no right to ask anything after what we did to you," she began, her voice low and urgent. "But you see how different he is since you arrived? He hasn't smiled like this in months. He hasn't talked this much in weeks." It was true. Even in the few hours I had spent there, I could see how Marcus seemed more animated, more present. It was as if my presence had lit something in him that had been dormant. "What are you proposing?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "We want to hire you again. Not to be a nanny, but to be, I don't know, a companion for him during treatment. Someone who stays with him when he's not feeling well, who takes him to medical appointments, who's here when he needs it." Helena paused, looking toward the bed where Marcus was. "We know it's a lot to ask, especially considering everything that happened, but you're the only person who can reach him this way." I looked at Marcus, who was laughing at something silly on TV. Seeing that sound coming from him after everything Helena had told me about how depressed he was felt like watching a small miracle happen before my eyes. "I accept," I said without hesitation. "But not for you, for him." Helena nodded, understanding perfectly. "Of course. And Keisha, this time will be different. You'll have all the respect and support you deserve, I promise." That night, I stayed until Marcus fell asleep. He insisted that I sit beside the bed, holding his hand until he fell asleep. His hands were so small and thin now, and I could feel every little bone through the pale skin. But the way he clung to me, even while sleeping, told me everything I needed to know about how much he had missed me. It was Helena who drove me home that night. During the drive back to my apartment, we remained silent for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts. "Keisha," she finally said when we were stopped at the traffic light near my building, "I need you to know that what we did was unforgivable. I was under a lot of stress at the time, with Robert constantly traveling for work, and when that jewelry disappeared," she stopped, breathing deeply. "There's no excuse for what we did. None. The past is the past, Helena," I replied, looking out the window at the empty streets of my neighborhood. "What matters now is Marcus." "You've always been a better person than I deserved," she said quietly. When I got to my apartment that night, I sat on my small bed and allowed all the emotions of the day to hit me at once. Joy at seeing Marcus again, sadness at seeing him so sick, anger at the lost time, hope for the future, and underneath it all, a current of something I didn't want to name. Because seeing Marcus in that hospital bed had awakened memories I kept carefully buried. Memories of another child, another hospital, another goodbye that had broken my heart into pieces 8 years ago. I got up from the bed and went to the old dresser in the corner of the room. In the bottom drawer, underneath some clothes I rarely wore, there was a small shoebox. My hands trembled slightly when I took it from its hiding place and placed it on the bed. Inside the box were some photos, a small hospital bracelet yellowed by time, and a paper folded and refolded so many times it was already falling apart at the creases. It was the only photo I had of him, my baby, my first love, the child I had been forced to give up when I was only 17. In the photo, he was only 3 days old. He was wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, sleeping peacefully. With an expression so serene, he looked almost angelic. He had been born with a head full of dark, curly hair, and I remembered how soft those curls were under my fingers during the few days I spent with him. But what caught my attention most in the photo, what always made me sigh when I looked at it, was a small birthmark he had on the side of his head, just above his left ear. It was a small heart-shaped spot, no bigger than a coin, but distinctive enough that I could never forget it. I gently ran my finger over the photo, as if I could touch his little face through the paper. "Where are you now, my love?" I whispered to the silence of my room. "Are you okay? Are you happy?" These were questions that haunted me every day for the past 8 years. I had chosen a closed adoption because I thought it would be easier for both of us, but now I questioned whether it had been the right decision. Not knowing anything about him, not being able to see him grow up, not knowing if he was safe and loved, it was constant torture. I put the photo back in the box and placed it back in its place. Tomorrow, I would start my new life caring for Marcus, and I needed all my emotional energy focused on him. I couldn't let memories of the past interfere with my ability to help that child who needed me so much. The weeks that followed were the most intense and rewarding of my life in a long time. I spent every day at the hospital with Marcus, accompanying him to medical appointments, playing with him during treatments, reading stories when he was feeling sick, and simply being present when he needed someone. The transformation in him was remarkable. Within days, he was back to being more like the Marcus I knew, more talkative, more playful, more present. The doctors were impressed with the improvement in his mood and disposition. "It's incredible how the presence of certain people can affect a child's recovery," commented Dr. Sarah Martinez, Marcus's pediatric oncologist, during one of our appointments. "Marcus has been responding much better to treatment since you returned." I felt useful again, necessary, loved. Marcus greeted me every morning with a smile that brightened my entire day and said goodbye to me every night with a hug I carried with me all the way home. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after I started working with the family again, Marcus was feeling particularly well. He had had a difficult morning with nausea from chemotherapy, but in the afternoon he was more animated and wanted to play. "Key, can you show me pictures of when you were little?" he asked out of nowhere, while we were putting together a puzzle on the small table in the room. "Pictures of when I was little?" I asked, surprised. "Why do you want to see that?" "I want to know what you were like, if you were pretty like you are now, if you like to play the same things I like," he said, fitting a puzzle piece with concentration. I smiled at him. "You think I'm pretty?" "The prettiest in the whole world," he answered without hesitation, making me laugh. Well, I don't have many pictures from when I was a kid, but I have some on my phone, I said, taking out my cell phone. I started scrolling through the few old photos I had digitized over the years. I stopped at a photo of me when I was about Marcus's age. It was a school photo, one of those official ones taken every year. I was smiling, showing a front tooth I had recently lost, and my hair was pulled back in 2 braids with colorful bows. "Look at this one," I said, showing the photo to Marcus. He took the phone in his small hands and studied the image carefully. "You were so cute," he exclaimed. "And look, you have a mark on your head just like mine." My blood froze. "What?" I asked, my voice coming out higher than normal. "Here, look." Marcus pointed to the phone screen, to an area just above my left ear where my hair was pulled back in one of the braids. "You have a mark exactly like mine. Look." He gently pulled the smooth skin of his bald head, exposing a small mark I had never noticed before. It was a heart-shaped birthmark, no bigger than a coin, located exactly in the same place where I had mine. The phone slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. I felt all the blood drain from my face, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to spin around me. "Key, are you okay?" Marcus asked, concerned with my sudden reaction. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I had just seen. Marcus's birthmark was identical to mine. Exactly identical. In the same place, the same size, the same shape. But that was impossible. Identical birthmarks between unrelated people were... My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I remembered the photo of my baby, the small heart-shaped mark he had on his head, the same mark Marcus had, the same mark I had. I need a glass of water, I managed to mumble, getting up from the chair so quickly it almost fell over. "Keisha, what happened?" Helena had entered the room at the exact moment I was having my breakdown, and the worry in her voice was evident. I looked at her, then at Marcus, who was still holding his head and looking at me with confusion, and then back at Helena. The words wouldn't come out of my mouth. My heart was beating so hard I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. "I need to step out for a minute." That was all I could say before practically running out of the room. I ran down the hospital corridor until I found a bathroom, went in, and locked the door behind me. I leaned against the sink and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, and there was panic in my eyes. With trembling hands, I moved my hair away from the side of my head and looked at my own birthmark. It was there, as it always had been, a small, heart-shaped spot just above my left ear. Exactly like the mark I had seen on Marcus's head. Exactly like the mark my baby had when he was born. Tears began streaming down my face as the impossible truth began to form in my mind. But before I could fully process what this meant, I heard someone knocking on the bathroom door. "Keisha, are you in there? Marcus is worried about you." It was Helena's voice, loaded with anxiety. I took a deep breath, wiped the tears from my face, and opened the door. Helena was standing there, her blue eyes full of concern. "Sorry, I think it was just a sudden dizzy spell." I lied, trying to smile. But Helena knew me too well. She studied my face carefully, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "Keisha, what really happened in there?" she asked quietly. And it was at that moment that I knew I couldn't keep this secret much longer. The truth was about to explode, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same for any of us. "Helena," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk, but not here, not now. Tonight, after Marcus is asleep." She nodded slowly, and I could see that she knew something monumental was about to be revealed. We returned to the room, where Marcus was anxiously waiting for my return. He ran to me and hugged my waist. "Are you feeling better, Key?" he asked, looking up with his worried eyes. "I'm better, baby," I replied, running my hand gently over his bald head, my fingers trembling slightly when they touched the small birthmark that had changed everything. While you're watching this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because the story is just beginning, and what's coming next will affect you in ways you can't imagine. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to act normally, but every time I looked at Marcus, my heart tightened more. Every gesture of his, every expression, every little way of being was being analyzed by a part of my mind that was desperately searching for similarities, for confirmations, for signs that the impossible truth forming in my thoughts could be real. When night came, and Marcus finally fell asleep, Helena and I left the hospital in silence. She took me to a small coffee shop that stayed open late, a discreet place where we could talk without being interrupted. We sat at a table in the back, away from other people, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Helena nervously stirred her coffee cup, while I tried to find the right words for what I needed to say. "Helena," I finally began, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. Something that could change everything." She looked up, and I saw in her eyes that she already suspected it was something serious. 8 years ago, when I was 17, I had a baby. The words came out in a rush, as if I needed to say them quickly before I lost the courage. I was very young, very poor, and I had no way to take care of him, so I gave him up for adoption. Helena became completely still, her cup suspended in the air halfway to her mouth. The baby was born right here, at Detroit Children's Hospital. It was a boy with dark, curly hair, and my voice failed, and I needed to take a deep breath before continuing. He had a birthmark on his head, heart-shaped, exactly like the one Marcus has. Helena's cup crashed against the saucer with a noise that seemed to echo throughout the entire coffee shop. Her face had turned completely white. "Keisha, what are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that I believe." I stopped, because saying it out loud would make it all real in a way I wasn't ready to face yet. "Helena, when did you adopt Marcus?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me with an expression that mixed shock, understanding, and something that seemed almost like fear. "8 years ago," she finally whispered. "He was 3 days old when he came to us." The coffee shop around us disappeared. The entire world disappeared. There was only me and Helena looking at each other across the small table, while the impossible and overwhelming truth settled between us like a bomb that had just exploded. Marcus wasn't just the child I had cared for and loved as a nanny. Marcus was my son, my baby. The one I had given up with a broken heart 8 years ago was back in my life in a way I could never have imagined. Fate had brought me back to him, and now he was dying, and I was possibly the only person in the world who could save him. But how could I tell him this truth? And more importantly, how would Helena and Robert react when they knew that the woman they had hired to care for their son was, in fact, the biological mother of the child? One thing I knew for sure: our lives had just become complicated in a way none of us were prepared to face. The silence between Helena and me stretched for an eternity. I could see tears forming in her blue eyes, and her breathing was visibly irregular. Finally, she reached across the table and touched mine, her cold fingers trembling against my skin. "Keisha, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" Her voice was loaded with a desperation that broke my heart. "The birthmarks are identical, Helena, identical. And the age, the location, the timing, everything fits perfectly," I replied, feeling hot tears streaming down my face. I carried his photo with me all these years, that little heart-shaped mark. I could never forget it. Helena withdrew her hand and covered her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she finally looked at me again, her eyes were red and filled with deep pain. "We didn't know, Keisha. I swear on everything that's sacred we didn't know. The adoption was closed. We had no information about you beyond what the agency told us, that you were a teenager who wanted to give her baby a better chance." She stopped, swallowing hard. "If we had known it was you wouldn't have hired me as a nanny." I completed the sentence for her, and the bitterness in my voice was undeniable. "You would have kept me away from him." "No!" Helena exclaimed, and her vehemence surprised me. "No, Keisha. If we had known it was you, we would have... I don't know what we would have done. But one thing I know, you were always the best thing that happened in Marcus's life, even before we knew this." We sat there for a few more minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. My mind was racing, trying to process all the implications of what I had discovered. Marcus was my son. My baby was dying, and I had been caring for him without knowing who he really was. "Helena, there's something you need to know," I finally said, my voice firm despite the tears. "If Marcus really is my biological son, that means I might be compatible for bone marrow donation. The chance of compatibility between mother and child is very high." Helena's eyes widened as she processed what that meant. You could save him." "I could. But first we need to confirm if my suspicion is correct. We need a DNA test." Helena nodded vigorously. "Yes, of course. We can arrange that first thing tomorrow." "But Keisha..." She hesitated, looking nervously around the coffee shop. If the tests confirm that you're his biological mother, what does that mean for us? For our family? It was the question I was trying to avoid, but I knew I would have to face eventually. What would happen to us if the truth was confirmed? How would Marcus react to discovering that the nanny he loved was actually his biological mother? How would Helena and Robert deal with the fact that the woman they had rejected and humiliated was the mother of the child they considered their son? I don't know, Helena. Honestly, I don't know, I replied. All I know is that Marcus is sick, and if I can help save him, I'm going to do it, regardless of what that means for the rest of our lives. We returned to the hospital in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Helena dropped me off at the entrance and went home, promising she would talk to Robert about everything that same night and would arrange the DNA tests first thing in the morning. I couldn't go home. Instead, I went back to Marcus's room and sat in the chair beside his bed, watching him sleep. In the dim light of the room, illuminated only by the soft light from the hallway coming through the half-open door, I studied every feature of his sleeping face. How had I not noticed before? Now that I knew, the similarities seemed so obvious. The line of his nose was identical to mine. His lips had the same curve. Even the way his eyebrows arched was familiar. How had I been so blind? My baby, I whispered to the darkness, reaching out to gently touch his cheek. My little baby? Marcus stirred slightly under my touch, but didn't wake up. I allowed myself to stay there for a few more hours, just watching him breathe, memorizing every detail of his face, trying to reconcile the baby I had given up 8 years ago with the brave and sweet boy he had become. The next morning, Helena arrived early with a medical team prepared to collect the samples needed for the DNA test. Dr. Rodriguez, the chief pediatric oncology doctor, was with them, and by the expression on his face, I could see that Helena had told him about our suspicion. Mrs. Washington, he said, extending his hand to greet me. I understand there's a possibility that you're Marcus's biological mother. If that's confirmed, it could completely change his prognosis. Marcus was awake and watching all the movement with curiosity. Why is everyone acting so strange? He asked, looking between the adults in the room. And why do you need my blood again? It's just a routine test, baby. I lied gently, not wanting to scare him with the truth yet. Nothing for you to worry about. The samples were collected quickly, and Dr. Rodriguez assured us we would have the results in 24 hours. They were the longest 24 hours of my life. I tried to act normally with Marcus, playing with him, reading stories, watching his favorite cartoons, but my mind was constantly focused on those small test tubes that contained the answer to the question that would change everything. Helena could barely stay still. She was constantly going in and out of the room, her hands shaking every time her phone rang, hoping it would be the call with the results. Robert came to see me that afternoon. He sat with me in the hallway while Marcus was taking a nap, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Helena told me about your suspicion, he finally said, his voice careful and controlled. I want you to know that, regardless of what the tests show, we're grateful for everything you've done for Marcus, for everything you continue to do. And if the tests confirm he's my son? I asked directly. What happens then? Robert sighed deeply. Honestly, Keisha, I don't know. Legally, he's our son. We have the adoption papers, he carries our name, he knows us as his parents. But biologically, he stopped, running his hands through his hair. If you really are his mother, and if you can save him, then we'll do whatever is necessary to make that happen. Even if that means you'll have to share him with me? I asked. Keisha, if you can save my son's life, I'd share him with the devil if necessary. Robert replied, and the raw emotion in his voice made me understand exactly how much they loved Marcus. The next morning, Dr. Rodriguez called us to his office. Helena, Robert, and I sat in uncomfortable chairs in front of his desk while he opened a manila envelope with the test results. My heart was beating so hard I was sure everyone in the office could hear it. My hands were sweating, and I pressed them together in my lap, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. The results are conclusive, Dr. Rodriguez said, looking directly at me. Mrs. Washington, there's a 99.9% match between you and Marcus. You are, without a doubt, his biological mother. The world stopped. Helena immediately started crying, sobs of relief and joy and fear mixed together. Robert closed his eyes and breathed deeply, as if trying to absorb the magnitude of what we had just discovered. I felt strangely empty. For days I had been preparing for this confirmation, but hearing it officially was still like taking a punch to the stomach. "There's more," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "We've already tested your compatibility for bone marrow donation, and the results are exceptional. You're a perfect donor for Marcus. With a bone marrow transplant from you, his chances of complete remission increased to over 90%. 90%? Helena whispered. I mean Marcus can be completely cured. He can go back to having a normal life, grow up, go to school, do everything a healthy child does." Dr. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since we entered his office. "But we need to act quickly. His condition has deteriorated in recent weeks, and we can't wait much longer." "When can we do the transplant?" I asked, my voice coming out firmer than I felt. "We can start preparations immediately. You'll need to do some additional tests to ensure you're healthy enough for donation, but assuming everything goes well, we could perform the procedure next week." Next week. In 7 days, I could save my son's life. We left the doctor's office in a state of collective shock. We walked through the hospital corridors in silence, each of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened. It was Helena who finally broke the silence when we got back to Marcus's room. "We need to tell him." "Tell him what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she was talking about. "The truth, about who you are, about what this means." Helena looked through the room window, where we could see Marcus playing with some toys on the bed. "He has a right to know. He's 8 years old, Helena. How do we explain to an 8-year-old child that the nanny he loves is actually the mother who gave him up as a baby?" "We don't explain it that way," Robert intervened. "We explain that you were very young when he was born, that you wanted him to have a family that could take better care of him, and that fate brought you back together when he needed you most." I looked at Marcus through the window. He was laughing at something he saw on TV, and at that moment he seemed almost normal, almost healthy. It was hard to believe that that cheerful child was fighting a disease that could kill him. "And after the transplant?" I asked. "What happens to us after?" Helena and Robert exchanged a look, and I could see they had discussed this. "We don't know," Helena admitted honestly. "This is a situation for which there's no instruction manual. But one thing we know, Marcus loves you and you love him. That has to count for something." That afternoon, the 3 of us entered Marcus's room together. He was feeling well enough to be sitting up in bed, coloring in a book I had brought him. "Marcus, baby, we need to talk to you about something important," I began, sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked up, his honey-colored eyes studying me carefully. "Is it about why everyone's been acting strange?" "Yes, it's about that." I smiled at him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Do you remember what we talked about regarding you being adopted?" Marcus nodded. Helena and Robert had always been honest with him about his adoption, explaining in age-appropriate terms that he had been born to another mother who couldn't take care of him, and that they had chosen him to be part of their family. "Well, we found out who your birth mother is," I continued, my heart beating so hard I was surprised he couldn't hear it. "You found out?" His eyes widened. "Who is she? Is she nice? Why couldn't she stay with me?" "She's very nice," Helena said softly. "In fact, you already know her." Marcus looked confused between the 3 adults in the room. "I know her?" I took a deep breath and took his small hands in mine. "Marcus, your birth mother is me." For a moment, he just looked at me, processing what I had just said. I could see the gears turning in his mind, trying to understand how this was possible. "You?" he finally whispered. "You're my real mom?" "I'm the mom who had you when you were born, yes. But Helena and Robert are your real parents too. They're the ones who raised you, who loved you, who took care of you your whole life," I explained carefully. "I was very young when you were born, just a teenager, and I had no way to take care of you the way you deserved. So I asked a very special family to take care of you, and they did it perfectly." Marcus was silent for a long moment, his eyes going from me to Helena and Robert, and back to me. "Is that why we have the same mark?" he finally asked. "Yes, that's why we have the same mark." I smiled through the tears that were beginning to stream down my face. "And is that why you were always so special to me?" he continued. "Is that why I felt you were different from other nannies? Maybe, baby. Maybe our hearts knew something our minds didn't know." Marcus let go of my hands and threw himself into my arms, hugging me with all the strength he had in his small, fragile body. "I always knew you were special," he whispered against my neck. "I always knew you loved me in a different way." I held him against me, breathing in the medicinal smell of his non-existent hair, feeling the weak but steady beat of his heart against my chest. And the best part of all this, Dr. Rodriguez had entered the room without us noticing, and his voice was full of joy, is that now that we know Keisha is your mother, she can help you get better. She can donate part of her bone marrow to you, and that will make you strong and healthy again. Marcus pulled back slightly to look at me. You can cure me? I can try, my love. I can try. And after I get better, will you go away again? The question came out as a whisper, but carried all the weight of his deepest fears. I looked at Helena and Robert, who were watching our interaction with tears in their eyes. They nodded almost imperceptibly. No, baby. If you want, I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure out a way to be a family, all of us together. 1 week later, I was lying in a hospital bed upstairs, preparing for the procedure that would save my son's life. The preparations had gone perfectly. All my tests were normal, and I was in perfect health condition for donation. Marcus was in another room, being prepared to receive my bone marrow. He had spent the last few days undergoing intensive chemotherapy to completely destroy his diseased marrow, preparing his body to receive mine. Helena had stayed with me during all the preparation, holding my hand when I was nervous, talking to me to distract me during moments of anxiety. Keisha, she said when the nurses started preparing me for the procedure, I want you to know that regardless of what happens, you'll always be part of our family. Marcus loves you, and we've learned to love you too. You're not just his biological mother. You're someone special to all of us. Thank you, Helena, for everything. For taking such good care of him, for letting me come back, for sharing him with me now, I replied, squeezing her hand. I know this isn't easy for you. Anything is worth his life, she said simply. The procedure was easier than I had imagined. With local anesthesia, the doctors extracted the necessary bone marrow from my hip. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but knowing that every drop they were collecting could save Marcus's life made any discomfort irrelevant. A few hours later, while I was still in the recovery room, I learned that the transplant had been successful. My bone marrow was being infused into Marcus's body at that very moment. Now it's a matter of waiting, Dr. Rodriguez explained when he came to visit me. In the coming weeks, we'll monitor whether the marrow is being accepted by his body. If everything goes well, in a few months, Marcus will be a completely healthy child again. In the days that followed, I stayed in the hospital recovering from the procedure and watching Marcus closely. Initially, he was very weak because of the intensive treatment he had received before the transplant. But gradually, day by day, I could see small signs of improvement. His color was returning. His appetite was improving. He was becoming more alert and more like himself. 2 weeks after the transplant, Dr. Rodriguez entered the room with the biggest smile I had ever seen on his face. I have good news, he announced. The first analyses show that the transplant was a complete success. The bone marrow is producing healthy cells, and all signs indicate that Marcus is in remission. Helena immediately started crying, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. Robert pulled her into a tight hug, and I could see him trying not to cry too. Marcus, who still didn't fully understand what all this meant, looked at the adults in the room with confusion. Does this mean I'm going to get better? He asked. This means you are going to get better, baby, I replied, picking him up despite my muscles still being sore from the procedure. You're going to grow up, go back to school, play with your friends, do everything a normal kid does. And you'll be there for all of it? He asked, his honey-colored eyes studying me seriously. If you want me to be, I'll be there for all of it. But 3 days later, when Marcus had finally been discharged and was going home, Helena and Robert asked me to talk privately. We met in Robert's office at the mansion, and for the first time since we discovered the truth, I felt a tension in the air that made me uncomfortable. Keisha, first we want to thank you, Helena began, but her voice was strangely formal. You saved our son's life, and that's a debt we can never repay. You don't owe me anything, I replied, but something in her tone made me alert. Marcus is my son too. Yes, and that's exactly what we need to talk about. Robert got up from his armchair and went to the window, standing with his back to me. Keisha, you understand that legally Marcus is our son, right? We have complete adoption documentation. He carries our name, our identity. My blood began to freeze. What are you trying to say? Helena exchanged a look with Robert before continuing. We've talked a lot about this over the past few days, and we've come to the conclusion that now that Marcus is cured, it would be better for everyone if you left our lives again. The words hit me like a slap in the face. What? Think about it, Keisha. Robert turned to face me, his eyes cold in a way I had never seen before. Marcus grew up 8 years believing we are his parents. He has an established life, a formed identity. Your presence now will only confuse him. But he already knows the truth, I protested, feeling panic begin to take over me. He knows I'm his biological mother. And that was a mistake, Helena said coldly. We shouldn't have told him. It was hasty on our part. I got up from the chair, my mind racing. You can't be serious. After everything we've been through? After I saved his life? And we're eternally grateful for that, Robert said. That's why we're prepared to compensate you financially for your generosity. Compensate? My voice came out high-pitched, incredulous. You think you can pay me to forget I have a son? Helena also stood up, and when she looked at me, I saw a coldness in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. Keisha, you need to understand. Marcus is our son. We raised him, educated him, loved him. You were just a donor. Twice. The cruelty of those words left me breathless. How can you say that? You saw how he reacted when he found out I was his mother. You saw how much he loves me. Children are resilient, Robert said with an indifference that shocked me. He'll get over it, but only if you get out of the picture now, before this becomes more complicated. And if I refuse? I asked, even though I knew I was walking into dangerous territory. Helena smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. It was calculating, almost cruel. Well, that would be a shame, because then we would have to consider other options. What other options? Robert returned to his desk and opened a drawer, taking out a folder of documents. As you know, Marcus is still in recovery period. He'll need specialized medical care for the next few months, expensive medications, regular consultations with specialists, constant tests. And I wasn't understanding where they were going with this. And if we decided we could no longer afford those costs, Helena left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. I felt the ground collapse under my feet. You're blackmailing me. You're threatening to deny medical treatment to my son if I don't disappear from his life. We're not threatening anything, Robert said calmly. We're just explaining reality. Maintaining a premium health plan for a child in post-cancer treatment is very expensive. If our family situation became, let's say, complicated, maybe we couldn't justify that expense anymore. Tears of rage and desperation began streaming down my face. You're monsters. How can you use a child's health as leverage? We're parents protecting our son, Helena said coldly, and we'll do whatever is necessary to protect him from situations that could harm his psychological well-being. His psychological well-being? I screamed. He loves me. He wants me to be part of his life. He's a child, Robert said. Children want many things that aren't good for them. It's up to adults to make the difficult decisions. I looked at both of them, these people I had respected and admired, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The desperation of the situation hit me like a giant wave. If I refused to leave, they could really cut Marcus's medical treatment, and without proper follow-up, there was always the risk of the disease returning. How long? I asked with a hoarse voice. What? Helena asked. How long are you giving me to get out of his life? 1 week, Robert answered without hesitation. Enough time for you to say goodbye and leave. And Keisha? He looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. If you try to tell Marcus about this conversation, or if you try to see him after the deadline, we'll make sure he never has access to the medical care he needs again. Do you understand? I left the mansion like a zombie, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The people I had trusted to care for my son when I couldn't had transformed into cruel monsters who were using his life as currency to keep me away from him. That night, I sat in my small apartment and cried like I hadn't cried since the day I gave Marcus up for adoption 8 years ago. The pain was the same, but amplified 1,000 times because now I knew my son. I loved him not just as an idea or a memory, but as the incredible person he had become. And once again, I was being forced to choose between my heart and his well-being. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that love isn't always enough, and that sometimes the cruelest people are those who should protect us. I spent the next 5 days in agony, trying to find a way out, a way to fight Helena and Robert without putting Marcus at risk. I consulted lawyers who told me that technically the Blackwoods were right. Legally, Marcus was their son, and they could make medical decisions for him without my interference. On the 6th day, I received a call from Marcus. "Key, you didn't come see me today. Is everything okay?" His voice sounded worried, and my heart shattered. "I'm fine, baby. I'm just a little busy." I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you come tomorrow? I miss you. I'll try." That was all I could say before hanging up and breaking down in tears. On the 7th day, I went to the Blackwood mansion for the last time. Helena met me at the door, and by the expression on her face, I knew she was expecting me. "You made the right decision," she said, but there was no triumph in her voice, just a coldness that made me realize I had never really known her. "I want to say goodbye to him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. But remember, you're leaving because you got a job in another city. Nothing about our conversation." I entered the house that had once been my second home and went to Marcus's room. He was reading a book in bed, and when he saw me, his face lit up with that smile that always melted my heart. "Key, you came." He put the book aside and sat up, reaching his arms out to me. I ran to him and hugged him with all the strength I had, trying to memorize the feeling of having him in my arms, the smell of his newly grown hair, the sound of his breathing against my neck. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," I began, and I felt my voice trembling. "What is it?" He pulled back to look at me, and the worry in his eyes made me want to lie, make up anything but the truth. "I got a very good job in another city, and I'm going to have to move." His expression changed instantly, going from joy to confusion, and then to a deep sadness that broke my heart. "You're going away? Again?" His voice was small, vulnerable. "I don't want to go, baby, but sometimes adults have to do things they don't want to do. But you said you'd never leave again. You promised." Tears began streaming down his cheeks, and each one was like a stab to my chest. "I know, my love, and I'm sorry, more than you can imagine." "How long will you be gone?" he asked, clinging to my shirt like he used to do when he was younger. I looked into his honey-colored eyes, those eyes that were so much like mine, and knew I couldn't lie completely to him. "I don't know, Marcus. I really don't know. But you'll come back, won't you? When I grow up, you'll come back?" I hugged him again, breathing in his scent, trying to engrave every second of that moment in my memory. "If it's possible, my love, if it's possible, I'll come back." I stayed with him until he fell asleep that night, holding his hand while he fought against sleep, as if he could keep me there just by force of will. When his breathing finally became regular and deep, I kissed his forehead softly and whispered words he couldn't hear. "I love you more than life, my boy, and someday, when you're big enough to understand, I hope you can forgive me for leaving again." I left the mansion that night knowing I might never see my son again, and for the second time in my life, I walked away from the child I loved more than anything in the world, carrying with me only memories and the hope that someday he would understand that everything I did was to protect him. 10 years passed, 10 long and empty years, in which I woke up every day thinking about Marcus, wondering how he was, if he still remembered me, if he had understood why I had to leave. I moved to another city, as I had said I would. I found work, built a small but stable life, but I never managed to fill the void that Marcus had left in my heart. Sometimes I searched for news about him on the internet. The Blackwood family had become even more powerful and influential over the years. Robert's billionaire empire had expanded globally, and they frequently appeared on the social pages of luxury magazines. In some photos, I saw a boy transforming into a teenager, growing up without me, always impeccably dressed at the most exclusive high society events. Marcus had become everything Helena and Robert had always dreamed of. An elegant, educated young man from the best private schools, attending elite universities. At 18, he was already considered one of the country's most promising heirs, destined to take over one of America's largest business conglomerates. And then, last week, my phone rang. The voice on the other side was deeper, cultivated, with the refined accent that only years in elite schools can provide. But I would recognize it anywhere. "Keisha Washington?" the voice asked, and my heart stopped. "Marcus?" I whispered. "Hi, Key," he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice, but also something more, a determination that reminded me of the brave boy he had always been. "It took a while, but I finally found you. I discovered that Marcus, now a 21-year-old billionaire young man who had recently assumed an executive position in the family company, had found a sealed box in Robert's private safe. Inside, it was the contract I had been forced to sign years ago, a legal document that prohibited me from contacting him under penalty of a millionaire fine. When I read that contract, Key, I understood everything. His voice was loaded with a cold anger that scared me. I understood why you suddenly disappeared. I understood the blackmail. I understood how they used my health as a weapon against you. He told me how he confronted Helena and Robert that same night. The discussion had been explosive, with accusations and truths finally coming to light. Helena had tried to justify her actions by saying she was protecting the family, but Marcus didn't accept excuses. They told me they thought your presence would complicate my identity and confuse my future in the company, he said bitterly, as if I were a chess piece they were moving. And you? I asked, afraid of the answer. Can you forgive me for abandoning you again? Key, you didn't abandon me. You were the victim of cruel blackmail from people who should have been grateful to you for the rest of their lives. His voice became softer. It took me a few years to fully understand what happened, but now I know exactly who you are and what you sacrificed for me. Marcus told me he used the billionaire resources of the family company to locate me. He hired private investigators, used connections across the country, until he finally found me living modestly in a small town 1,000 miles from Detroit. I'm coming to get you, he said simply, not for a visit, to bring you back home. 3 days later, a private jet landed at my small town's airport. It was a Gulfstream G650, the kind of aircraft I only saw in movies. When I descended the aircraft stairs, Marcus was waiting for me on the tarmac. He had become an imposing man, tall and elegant, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I earned in a year. But when our eyes met, I still saw the 8-year-old boy who used to cling to my legs. Key. That was all he said, before wrapping me in a hug that lasted forever. During the flight back to Detroit, he told me about his life, how he had excelled in business, expanding the family's investments into new areas, how he had become one of the country's most respected young executives, and how, despite all the financial success, he always felt something essential was missing from his life. They gave me everything, Key. Money, education, connections, power, but they could never give you back to me. He looked out the jet window, watching the clouds pass by. And now I have enough resources to fix that. Marcus had bought me a mansion in one of Detroit's most exclusive neighborhoods. Not just a house, but a $3 million property with landscaped gardens, a pool, and a stunning view of the lake. He had also arranged a premium health plan, a luxury car, and a bank account with enough resources so I would never have to worry about money again. You saved me twice, Key. First by giving me life, then by saving my life. Now it's my turn to take care of you. The first meetings with Helena and Robert were tense, to say the least. They were visibly uncomfortable with my presence back in their lives, especially knowing that Marcus had discovered the whole truth about our forced separation. We did what we thought was best for Marcus, Helena said during a particularly difficult dinner at the Blackwood mansion. Maybe our methods were extreme, but our intentions were to protect him. Your intentions were to control me, Marcus replied coldly. And using a child's health as blackmail is unforgivable, no matter what the justification was. It took months, but gradually, we found a new balance. Helena and Robert realized that Marcus wasn't willing to forgive them completely unless they accepted my permanent presence in his life. And since he now controlled a significant part of the family business, they had no choice but to adapt. During this period, Marcus and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. We were no longer the nanny and child we had been, nor exactly mother and son in the traditional sense. We were something new, unique, two people who shared a story of love, sacrifice, and reunion that had transformed us into something stronger. You know I'm getting married in 2 months, Marcus told me one afternoon as we walked through the gardens of my new house. I felt my heart skip a beat. Married? To whom? He smiled, and in that smile I saw the boy he once was. To Isabella Santos. You'll like her, Key. She knows our whole story and is eager to meet you. Isabella was a brilliant young lawyer from a very wealthy family too, but who had grown up knowing about adoption because she herself was adopted. When Marcus told her our story, Isabella not only understood, but insisted that I should be part of the wedding. Any woman who loves Marcus has to understand that you're an essential part of his life, she told me when we met. And I don't just understand, I immensely respect what you did for him." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. The event would be held at the Blackwood property, transformed into a fairy tale setting. Imported flowers from Holland, a complete symphony orchestra, famous chefs, and a guest list that included some of the country's most influential people. 3 days before the ceremony, Marcus came to me with a serious expression. "Key, I have a request to make," he said, sitting beside me on the silk sofa in my new living room. "Anything, my love. I want you to walk me down the aisle, together with Helena." He held my hands. "I know that traditionally it's the mother who accompanies the groom, but I have 2 mothers, and I want both of them with me at the most important moment of my life." Tears began streaming down my face. "Marcus, are you sure? This will cause a lot of talk, a lot of attention." "Let them talk," he said with the confidence of someone who never had to worry about others' opinions. "I'm 21 years old. I'm a billionaire, and I can do whatever I want at my own wedding. And what I want is to honor the 2 women who raised me." Helena, when she learned about Marcus's plan, was visibly shaken. "Marcus, are you sure? What will people think?" "They'll think I'm a man who honors all the important people in his life, not just the conventionally acceptable ones," he replied. "And if that bothers anyone, they don't need to be here." On the wedding day, I was in the groom's preparation room, helping Marcus with his tie. He was impeccable in his custom-made tuxedo, every detail perfect, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. "Are you okay, baby?" I asked, using the affectionate nickname I always called him. "I'm perfect now that you're here." He smiled, holding my hand. "Key, thank you for everything, for giving me life, for saving me, for coming back when I needed you." "Thank you for finding me," I replied, "for forgiving me, for giving me a second chance to be your mother." When the time came, I walked toward the altar with Marcus on one side and Helena on the other. I could feel the curious and even shocked looks from the guests. After all, it wasn't common to see a groom entering with 2 women. But Marcus walked with his head held high, proud of his unconventional choice. The ceremony was beautiful. Isabella was radiant in her designer dress, and when Marcus said his vows, he mentioned how the love of his 2 mothers had taught him about the importance of chosen family, not just biological family. At the reception, during his speech, Marcus stood up and asked for everyone's attention. "I want to take this moment to thank the 2 most important women in my life," he said, his voice echoing through the elegant ballroom. "Helena Blackwood, who raised me, educated me, and gave me all the opportunities that brought me here. And Keisha Washington, who gave me life twice, first when I was born, and then when she saved me from a disease that could have killed me." The ballroom fell into absolute silence. Marcus continued. "These 2 women taught me that family isn't just about blood or about who raises you. It's about unconditional love, sacrifice, and being present when you need it most. Today, on the happiest day of my life, I want everyone to know that I am the man I am because I was lucky enough to be loved by 2 extraordinary mothers." The applause was deafening. I saw tears in many guests' eyes, and even Helena was openly crying. Later that night, when the party was ending and guests were starting to leave, Marcus, Isabella, and I sat on the mansion's porch, watching the city lights shine in the distance. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we live," Marcus said simply. "We build memories. We are a family in our own unique and special way." Isabella took my hand. "And when we have children, they'll know the incredible story of how their grandmother saved their grandfather's life twice." I looked at both of them, these young billionaires who had the whole world at their disposal, but who chose to include a simple woman like me in their most important plans. And I knew that despite all the pain, all the separations, all the impossible choices I had to make, it had all been worth it. Because this is the truth about true love. It doesn't know social class, doesn't bow to conventions, and doesn't give up even when forced into silence for years. It waits, it persists, and when it's real, it always finds a way to triumph over those who try to destroy it. My name is Keisha Washington. I was a single mother at 17, a nanny to a boy who didn't know he was my son, a bone marrow donor who saved his life, and a victim of cruel blackmail that separated me from him for a decade. But today, I'm simply the proud mother of an extraordinary young billionaire who proved that sometimes, just sometimes, happy endings really do happen. and that a mother's love can overcome any obstacle, even the power and cruelty of one of the country's richest families. This is our story. And now finally, we can live the rest of it together.